Princess Elena stood at the tall windows of Valdoria Palace, watching the morning mist roll across the emerald gardens. Her fingers traced the cold glass as she tried to steady her breathing. The weight of what she had just learned pressed down on her chest like a stone. Behind her, the ornate clock in the royal study ticked away the seconds, each sound echoing through the silence that had fallen over the room. Dr. Harrison, the royal physician, had left only minutes ago, but his words still rang in her ears. The diagnosis was final, confirmed by 3 different specialists from across the kingdom. King Ferdinand, her beloved father and the ruler of Valdoria for 37 years, was facing a battle that even his royal strength could not win. Elena turned from the window and looked at the mahogany desk where her father had signed countless treaties, laws, and royal decrees. The leather chair where he sat every morning to review state matters now seemed impossibly empty, though he was still alive, still fighting. She could hear his voice from their conversation the night before, when he had finally told her the truth about his condition. "My dear Elena," he had said, his usually strong voice trembling slightly, "there comes a time when even kings must face their greatest enemy. Mine has come sooner than I hoped, but we must be brave. The kingdom needs us to be brave." The kingdom of Valdoria had known peace and prosperity under King Ferdinand's rule. The people loved their monarch, who had modernized their small European nation while preserving its rich traditions. He had built schools, hospitals, and brought technology to even the remotest villages. Under his leadership, Valdoria had become a model for other small nations, balancing progress with heritage. But now everything was about to change. Elena walked to her father's desk and picked up the silver-framed photograph that always sat beside his papers. It showed the royal family during happier times. King Ferdinand with his warm smile, Queen Isabella before her own passing 5 years ago, Elena herself as a young woman, and her 2 younger brothers, Prince Marcus and Prince Alexander. The boys, now 25 and 23 respectively, were traveling abroad, unaware of the storm brewing at home. The palace halls, usually filled with the gentle bustle of staff and advisors, seemed unusually quiet today. Even the birds in the royal gardens appeared to sense the gravity of the situation, their usual cheerful songs replaced by subdued chirping. Elena knew that soon, very soon, this peaceful morning would be shattered by the reality they could no longer hide. She thought about her brothers, Marcus and Alexander, who were currently on a diplomatic mission to neighboring countries, strengthening trade relationships and cultural exchanges. Marcus, the crown prince, was in Switzerland meeting with banking officials about economic partnerships. Alexander was in Denmark, working on environmental protection agreements. Both were passionate about their royal duties and devoted to Valdoria's future. Neither knew that their father was running out of time. The responsibility of telling them fell squarely on Elena's shoulders. As the only child currently in the kingdom, she had become her father's closest advisor and confidant. She understood the delicate balance of royal duty and family loyalty better than anyone. But understanding it and living it were 2 very different things. Elena remembered the conversation she had with her father just 2 hours earlier, when he had finally made his decision about informing the princes. "Elena, my daughter," the king had said, sitting in his private chambers still in his nightrobes, looking frailer than she had ever seen him. "We cannot wait any longer. The physicians have been clear about the timeline. Marcus and Alexander must return home immediately. They deserve to know the truth, and the kingdom needs them here for what is to come." "But father," Elena had replied, her heart breaking at seeing him so vulnerable, "telling them means making it real. Once we say the words, there's no going back to the way things were." King Ferdinand had reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly from the medication. "My dear child, it became real the moment Dr. Harrison confirmed the diagnosis 3 weeks ago. We have been living in borrowed time, and that time is running out. The people of Valdoria have a right to know what is happening to their king, and my sons have a right to prepare for their future responsibilities. The weight of his words settled over Elena like a heavy cloak. She knew he was right, but the thought of making those phone calls, of hearing her brothers' voices break when they learned the news, was almost unbearable. She had always been the strong one in the family, the one who held everyone together after their mother's death. Now, once again, she would have to be the bearer of devastating news. Elena walked to the private telephone in her father's study, a secure line used only for the most sensitive royal communications. Her hands shook as she picked up the receiver. She knew that within the hour she would have to call Marcus first, then Alexander. The conversations would change their lives forever and begin a chain of events that would transform the kingdom of Valdoria. As she stood there, phone in hand, Elena thought about the people of Valdoria, who would soon learn that their beloved king was facing his final battle. She thought about the palace staff who had served the royal family for decades, the government officials who depended on the king's wisdom, and the millions of citizens who looked to the crown for stability and leadership. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the study floor. Soon, the regular palace routine would begin. Meetings with ministers, review of state papers, audiences with citizens. But today would be different. Today would mark the beginning of the end of an era. Elena took a deep breath and began to dial Marcus's number in Switzerland. Her heart pounded as she listened to the international connection being established. In a few moments, she would speak the words that would shatter her family's world and change the course of Valdoria's history. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Elena closed her eyes and prepared herself for the most difficult conversation of her life. In the distance, she could hear the palace bells chiming 9 o'clock, marking not just the hour, but the moment when everything would change forever. When Marcus finally answered, his cheerful voice greeting her from across the continent, Elena felt her resolve strengthen. This was her duty, her responsibility to her family and her kingdom. Whatever came next, she would face it with the courage and dignity befitting a princess of Valdoria. "Marcus," Elena said into the phone, her voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil in her heart. "I need you to sit down. There's something urgent we need to discuss." The cheerfulness in her brother's voice immediately shifted to concern. "Elena? What's wrong? You sound strange. Is everything all right at home?" Elena gazed out at the Swiss Alps, visible through the hotel window where Marcus was staying. Even from hundreds of miles away, she could picture his face changing from curiosity to worry. Marcus had always been intuitive, able to sense when something was amiss in their family. It was one of the qualities that would make him a good king someday, sooner than anyone had planned. "Marcus, I need you to promise me you're sitting down," Elena repeated, buying herself a few more seconds to find the right words. How do you tell someone that their entire world is about to crumble? How do you explain that the father they adore, the man who taught them everything about duty and honor, is running out of time? "I'm sitting, Elena. Please, just tell me what's happening." Elena closed her eyes and delivered the news as gently as she could. She told him about the symptoms that had been growing worse over the past months. Symptoms their father had hidden from everyone except the royal physicians. She explained the series of tests, the consultations with specialists, the second and third opinions that all confirmed the same devastating diagnosis. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. Elena could hear Marcus breathing, could almost feel his shock traveling across the miles between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "How long?" he asked, the 2 words carrying the weight of a future crown and a kingdom's destiny. "The doctors say months, not years," Elena replied honestly. Father wants to tell Alexander together when you both return. He's trying to arrange his affairs to prepare for the transition. The Prime Minister and the Council of Advisors have been informed, but we've managed to keep it from the press so far. I'll catch the next flight home, Marcus said, his voice stronger now, the Crown Prince taking charge even in his grief. What about Alexander? Does he know anything? Nothing yet. Father thought it would be better if we told him in person, together as a family. He's supposed to return from Denmark tomorrow anyway. We can tell him then. Elena could hear Marcus moving around, probably already packing his bags. Despite the devastating news, she felt a surge of pride in her brother. This was exactly the kind of leadership Valdoria would need in the difficult times ahead. Elena, Marcus said after a moment, how are you holding up? This must have been incredibly hard for you, knowing this alone. The kindness in his voice almost broke Elena's carefully maintained composure. I'm managing, Marcus. Father has been so brave about everything. He's more worried about the kingdom and about you and Alexander than he is about himself. He keeps talking about making sure the transition is smooth, about protecting Valdoria's stability. That sounds like him, Marcus said with a sad laugh. Always the king first, even now. After ending the call with Marcus, Elena sat in her father's study for several minutes, gathering her strength for the next challenge. The palace was stirring to life around her. She could hear the morning shift of guards changing, the distant sounds of kitchen staff preparing breakfast, the soft footsteps of housekeepers beginning their daily routines. None of them knew yet that their world was about to change. The loyal staff of Valdoria Palace had served the royal family for decades, some for their entire careers. Head butler Wilhelm had been with the family since before Elena was born. Mrs. Hoffman, the head housekeeper, had helped raise all 3 royal children. Captain Eriksson, the head of palace security, had protected the king through numerous state visits and public appearances. These people weren't just employees, they were part of the royal family's extended family. They had celebrated royal birthdays, mourned Queen Isabella's death, and had watched the royal children grow into capable adults dedicated to serving their country. Soon Elena would have to find a way to tell them too. But first, there was the matter of the Prime Minister and the government. Elena knew that her father had already begun briefing key officials, but there would be constitutional issues to address, succession protocols to follow, and careful planning required to maintain stability during the transition. Elena walked through the palace corridors toward her father's private chambers. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the portraits of previous kings and queens that lined the walls. These ancestors had guided Valdoria through wars, economic challenges, natural disasters, and political upheavals. Soon Marcus would join their ranks, carrying on a legacy that stretched back over 4 centuries. She found King Ferdinand in his breakfast room, dressed in his formal morning attire despite the early hour. He looked up as she entered, his eyes searching her face for signs of how the conversation with Marcus had gone. He's coming home immediately, Elena reported, taking the seat across from her father at the small, intimate table they had shared countless family meals at over the years. He took the news as well as could be expected. He wants to be here when we tell Alexander. The king nodded slowly, relief visible on his weathered features. Good. I knew I could count on Marcus to handle this with maturity. He'll make a fine king, Elena. Perhaps even better than his old father. Father, don't say that, Elena protested. You've been an extraordinary king. The people love you, and you've made Valdoria into something special. Marcus learned everything about leadership from watching you. King Ferdinand reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. You've been my strength through this, Elena. I don't know what I would have done without you these past weeks. Having to carry this burden alone would have been unbearable. As they sat together in the gentle morning light, Elena thought about the next few days and weeks. There would be difficult conversations with Alexander, emotional meetings with the palace staff, careful coordination with government officials, and eventually, the heartbreaking task of informing the people of Valdoria about their king's condition. The kingdom would need to see strength and unity from the royal family during this transition. Elena knew that her role would be crucial, supporting Marcus as he prepared to assume the throne, helping Alexander find his place in the new order, and serving as a bridge between the monarchy and the people during uncertain times. Outside the breakfast room windows, the gardens of Valdoria Palace bloomed with spring flowers, a reminder that life continued even in the face of loss. The kingdom that King Ferdinand had worked so hard to build and protect would endure, carried forward by his children and the democratic institutions he had helped strengthen during his reign. Elena looked at her father, memorizing his face in the soft morning light. Soon, there would be difficult days ahead: medical appointments, political meetings, family conferences, and public appearances that would require tremendous courage from everyone involved. But for now, in this quiet moment, she simply sat with the man who had taught her everything about duty, honor, and love, grateful for whatever time they had left together. The next afternoon, Elena stood in the palace's private family lounge, watching through the window as Prince Alexander's motorcade pulled through the main gates. Her younger brother had returned from Denmark as scheduled, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Marcus had arrived on an emergency flight just 2 hours earlier, and the three siblings would now face the most difficult family meeting of their lives. King Ferdinand sat in his favorite armchair, the one Queen Isabella had given him for their 20th wedding anniversary. Despite his illness, he had insisted on dressing in his formal royal attire for this conversation. Elena understood why. Even in his most vulnerable moment, he remained the king, setting an example of strength and dignity for his children. Alexander burst through the doors with his characteristic energy, his face bright with excitement from his successful diplomatic mission in Denmark. "Father, Elena, I have so much to tell you about the environmental agreements we've established. The Danish government is incredibly supportive of our green energy initiatives, and I think we can create a model that other small nations can follow." He stopped short when he saw Marcus, who wasn't supposed to return from Switzerland for another week. "Marcus, what are you doing here? I thought your banking meetings weren't finished until Friday." The room fell silent. Elena watched as Alexander's expression slowly changed from confusion to concern as he noticed the serious faces around him. Her youngest brother had always been the most optimistic of the three siblings, the one who saw possibilities where others saw problems. This quality made him an excellent diplomat and environmental advocate, but it also meant that devastating news hit him particularly hard. "Alexander, please sit down," King Ferdinand said gently, gesturing to the sofa across from his chair. "There's something important we need to discuss as a family." Alexander looked between his siblings and father, his diplomatic training helping him read the gravity of the situation even without knowing the details. He sat down slowly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. King Ferdinand took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice was steady, carrying the same authority that had guided cabinet meetings and addressed the nation during times of crisis. But Elena could see the effort it took him to maintain that composure as he told his youngest son about the diagnosis, the prognosis, and the decisions that lay ahead. Alexander listened in complete silence, his face growing paler with each word. When their father finished speaking, Alexander didn't move or speak for several long minutes. Elena wanted to reach out to comfort him, but she knew he needed time to process what he had just heard. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice barely audible. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, Elena answered honestly. "Father wanted to wait until both you and Marcus could be here together." 3 weeks, Alexander repeated, looking at his father with a mixture of love and frustration. 3 weeks you've been carrying this alone. Why didn't you tell us immediately? King Ferdinand leaned forward in his chair. Because, my son, you and Marcus were doing important work for Valdoria. The banking negotiations and environmental agreements you've been working on will benefit our people for years to come. I didn't want to interrupt that important service to the kingdom. Father, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since Alexander's arrival, we're your sons first, princes second. We should have been here with you. And you're here now, the king replied firmly. That's what matters. Elena watched as her family struggled to find their footing in this new reality. Each of them was processing the news differently. Marcus, with the weight of impending kingship on his shoulders. Alexander, with the shock of someone whose world had suddenly shifted. And their father, with the complex emotions of a man preparing to leave behind everything he loved. What happens next? Alexander asked, his diplomatic nature taking over even in his grief. What do we need to do for the kingdom? King Ferdinand smiled proudly at his youngest son's immediate concern for their people. We need to prepare for a transition that maintains stability and confidence. The Prime Minister and key cabinet members have been briefed, but we'll need to inform the broader government, the military leadership, and eventually the public. How much time do we have? Marcus asked, though Elena could see in his face that he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The physicians are optimistic that I have several months, possibly longer if the treatments are effective, their father replied. But we need to be realistic and prepare for various scenarios. Marcus, you'll need to begin taking on more formal responsibilities immediately. Alexander, your role as an environmental advocate and diplomat will become even more important as we show the world that Valdoria remains strong and forward-thinking. Elena felt a surge of admiration for her father. Even facing his own mortality, he was thinking strategically about the kingdom's future, about how to protect the institution of the monarchy and the well-being of the Valdorian people. What about the staff? Elena asked. They've been like family to us. They deserve to know. I want to tell them personally, King Ferdinand said. Wilhelm has served us for 43 years. Mrs. Hoffman has been here since before you were born, Elena. Captain Eriksson has risked his life to protect our family countless times. They've earned the right to hear this news directly from me. The conversation continued for another hour as the family discussed practical matters. Medical care arrangements, security considerations, constitutional requirements for the succession, and the delicate matter of public communication. Elena took notes, knowing that in the coming weeks, these details would become crucial for maintaining the stability her father prized so highly. As the afternoon sun began to set over the palace gardens, casting a golden glow through the family lounge windows, Elena looked around at her father and brothers. This was perhaps the last time they would all be together as simply a family before the weight of royal protocol and public expectations took over their lives completely. I want you all to know, King Ferdinand said as their formal discussion drew to a close, that my greatest achievement has not been anything I've accomplished as King of Valdoria. It has been watching the three of you grow into people of integrity, compassion, and strength. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become. That evening, after Marcus and Alexander had gone to their rooms to process the day's revelations, Elena remained with her father in his private study. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the capital city twinkle beyond the palace grounds. Elena, her father said eventually, I need you to promise me something. Anything, father? Promise me that after I'm gone, you'll help your brothers remember that being royal is about service, not privilege. Help them remember that the crown is a responsibility, not a reward. The people of Valdoria deserve leaders who put the kingdom's welfare above their own comfort. Elena reached for her father's hand. I promise, Father. But you'll have time to remind them yourself. The treatments might give us more time than the doctors think. King Ferdinand squeezed her hand gently. Perhaps. But a wise king prepares for all possibilities. In the distance, the palace bells chimed 9 o'clock, just as they had the morning before when Elena had first made the difficult phone call to Marcus. But tonight, the sound carried a different meaning. It marked not just the end of another day, but the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Valdoria. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings with government officials, careful preparation of public statements, and the complex work of preparing a kingdom for transition. But tonight, Elena sat with her father, grateful for his wisdom, his strength, and the time they still had together. Whatever the future held, the royal family would face it united, guided by the values King Ferdinand had instilled in them and committed to serving the people of Valdoria with honor and dignity. The kingdom would endure as it had for centuries, carried forward by love, duty, and the unbreakable bonds of family.